I'm not sure if you noticed this, but Andre's Zelda Breath of the Wild analysis is long. Like, really long. So long that it's probably hard for some of you to even sit down and watch it all in one sitting. But we're here to help by making it all just a little bit more manageable and breaking up the analysis into multiple parts. In this excerpt, we look at the shrines, the monks within the shrines, the guardians, and more. Take it away, Andre.
Anyways, after all of this, the old man then draws Link's attention to a nearby shrine, which is just one more than 100 in the game, according to Nintendo. And we ourselves have heard that the final number is somewhere between that and 130. Now, according to the old man, the shrine lit up the moment that the towers rose from the ground. And we can see proof of that in this video from before the towers were activated, where we can see an unlit shrine in the distance, which shows that they're completely inaccessible until you activate the tower here. But here's a question: does this tower only activate the shrines in the same region, or every shrine around the world? Well, we think we have our answer, since we can see other shrines in the background lit in red, while their respective nearby towers aren't yet activated. So it would appear that this first tower is the one that activates them all. And maybe that's what the antenna is for, as in it wirelessly activated the shrines. Regardless, the shrine is predictably lit up in red, just like the other technology that's yet to be fully activated by Link. So in order to gain access, Link will have to use a Sheikah Slate at the podium just outside to activate the lift, which will then turn the shrine blue, again indicating it's been activated like everything else. Which also makes it easy to see at a glance which shrines Link has or hasn't already visited, just like with the towers. And this is especially useful because it seems you can visit the shrines in whichever order you want, including the 4 in the plateau here. Now, after riding the lift down at any of the plateau's 4 shrines, Link will find a podium at the start of each one they can hold a Sheikah Slate to in order to download additional abilities called runes. And these runes include the powers of Magnesis, Cryonis, Stasis, and Remote Bombs. But we'll talk more about them later. And like the map regions, the information for the runes is downloaded to the Sheikah Slate via a droplet of water. Yeah, it's a neat effect, but there's just a little bit more to it than just looking cool. Because you might have noticed a Sheikah symbol on the stalactite just above, but it's only the top half of the icon as it's missing the teardrop portion. That is until the droplet forms, which represents the teardrop, which itself is made up of the information flowing down to it, and thereby completing the symbol. But the teardrop only lingers for a second or two before dropping, which is also symbolic of the passing of knowledge from the Sheikah to Link. It's some pretty neat stuff. At any rate, the shrines in the plateau basically act as a tutorial for each of those runes. Now, if any of this sounds familiar, yeah, shrines are basically mini dungeons, in that they contain a series of puzzles or obstacles for Link to get through. And some of those puzzles are even optional, because Nintendo told us that they'll often contain an out-of-the-way chest that you'll then have to figure out how to get. But the goods inside should make it worth your while. Now, as we mentioned before, Nintendo has made it clear that the shrines aren't replacements for the dungeons, which makes sense given that dungeons usually take at least an hour to get through, whereas the shrines we've seen so far only take about 5 to 10 minutes on average. Although Nintendo has also stated that some shrines will be longer. Now, I realize it may not sound like much, but consider this. If we calculate the total time for the shrines using even the most conservative figures, as in 5 minutes each for 100 shrines, that still comes out to over 8 hours of gameplay for just the shrines alone. And if we assume that even half of those are actually 10 minutes in length, then we're looking at over 12 hours. Yeah, it's kinda nuts. And again, that's on the very conservative end. Now, although the exact contents and layout of each shrine obviously differ, they do seem to be very similar in structure and appearance. After all, they all seem to be accessed via this distinctive looking structure above ground, which leads into the shrine itself deep underground. And these shrines are all built out of shiny metallic material that Link is unable to climb, which requires that he uses his brains instead of his brawn to get around. So it's pretty dang obvious that there's nothing natural about these shrines, just like with the Shrine of Resurrection where Link awoke, and the towers that popped out of the ground. Heck, even the single type of enemy that we see here, being mini guardians, are obviously mechanical in nature, which makes sense given the common theme of all this being Sheikah technology, at least based on their symbol being found everywhere. But as artificial as these shrines may be, they're not completely devoid of life. Well, sort of. Because it seems you'll always find a monk at the end waiting inside a shrine of his own, who even introduce themselves as humble monks. But they're protected by a barrier made of energy, which Link is able to dispense with simply by touching it. Perhaps this too is because of the Sheikah Slate? Although the slate itself doesn't seem to react at all, which might tie back into our theory of Link himself having a technology angle to him. After all, we can't imagine that just anyone could break through that barrier, because what would be the point of a barrier then? So something has to be triggering it. We're just not sure what. Now, each of those monks actually has their own name, which is what the shrine is also named after. And the first shrine here that the old man points to is called Oman O. But there's something pretty clever about that name, because if you rearrange the letters, it actually says Aonuma, as in Eiji Aonuma, the game's director. So we have a feeling that the other shrines, with similarly peculiar names, might be following suit, featuring the rearranged letters of people from the development staff. So that's pretty cool that they make an in-game cameo of sorts. Although, there is a certain irony in using monks as one's in-game representation when they also profess to being humble. Anyways, even though the monks all have different names, they all look remarkably similar, with an elderly body type and a Sheikah symbol on their head, which we're guessing probably means they're Sheikah too. I know, it's that level of insight that only the analysis machine can provide. But even ignoring that symbol, their body type and pose is extremely similar to old Impa in Skyward Sword, who again is a Sheikah. And to back all of this up, even the old man tells you that something of the Sheikah might still remain hidden away in a shrine such as this, perhaps in reference to those very same monks. Oh, and that Sheikah symbol is also likely symbolic of the third eye that has historically been represented as being on the forehead, which is of course a concept that suggests a level of perception beyond ordinary sight, which is something the monks appear to have given that they can communicate with Link the moment he enters a shrine. Heck, the monks even say themselves that they've been blessed with the sight of the goddess Hylia. And they continue that they're dedicated to helping those who seek to defeat Ganon, and that with Link's arrival, their duty is now fulfilled. And finally, they award Link a spirit orb for finding them, before evaporating into some kind of magical dust. But what are those spirit orbs for anyway? Well, the old man does promise Link that if he finds a treasure within 4 of the plateau shrines, he'll give Link a paraglider. Sweet! And by treasure, we're reasonably confident he means the spirit orbs. But what about all the other shrines and their spirit orbs? After all, we know from Treehouse Live that the monks outside of the plateau still award spirit orbs too, and Nintendo has even said that the orbs will serve another or different purpose in the final game. So we have a couple of ideas of what that could be. For one, we think the paraglider might be a clue. After all, it seems to be Link's ticket off of the plateau, making the 4 orbs here essentially act as a gate to further progression in the game. So maybe the rest of the orbs serve a similar purpose, say by preventing access to dungeons until you have a certain amount, kind of like Star Doors in Mario. But then again, the game's director has also suggested that you'll be able to fight Ganon, if you so choose, surprisingly early into the game, perhaps indicating there won't be any gates like this. So we have another idea. Seeing as the spirit orbs are all absorbed into Link's body, as in they're literally internalized, we think they may be used to upgrade something about himself, such as his stamina, heart meter, or maybe even rune abilities. After all, Nintendo did confirm to us at E3 that you'd be able to upgrade Link's abilities in some way. They just didn't tell us how. Now, even though all the monks might look the same at first, there are actually some very subtle differences between all 6 of the ones we've seen so far. Take the 4 in the plateau for example. Even though they're all dressed the same, they also all have a slightly different pose, with their hands outstretched in varying ways. And though the 2 monks in the shrines outside of the plateau share the same poses, they're augmented visually with a cloth over their face, and one of them is made even more distinct with the circular decoration behind them. So it appears that every monk will be unique beyond just their name. But we also wonder if monks in similar regions will have similar traits, such as how the 4 in the plateau all have the same physical appearance with only the pose changing, while the 2 we've seen outside the plateau share the face cloth. Could they both be from the same region maybe? Now while the monks have a physical presence and clearly communicate with Link, there's something odd about them. Their mouths don't move when they talk. In fact, they don't move at all. Not even a little bit. Not even to breathe. So we think it's pretty clear that they exist in a more spiritual sense than an actual physical one. Oh yeah, then there's the fact that they just disintegrate into a green mist, which stands in stark contrast to the blue energy seen elsewhere in the game, which really does suggest as more spiritual, or magical at the least, as opposed to being technology based. Now all of this raises the question as to the exact purpose of these shrines. Were they built just to protect the monks? Perhaps until the arrival of a hero like Link? It's impossible to say, although we do have another idea, and it might just involve the towers too. Okay, so we've already pointed out the various lighted circles connected by lines before, and we can see them plastered all over the walls of the shrines, as well as the sides of the towers. But we wonder if there might be even more to them than what we've already suggested, because those circles and lines are also commonly used to represent computer networks. So could all of these shrines and towers perhaps be linked to one giant network, like a Hylian internet? Both the towers and shrines do seem to put an emphasis on the passing of knowledge after all, much like the very internet you're on right now. So will something happen when you activate them all and complete the network? And could they perhaps be tied to those 4 pillars outside Hyrule Castle as well? And speaking of connections, after you finish your first shrine, the old man mysteriously appears once again, where he explains that the towers and shrines are all connected to the Sheikah Slate, which in turn is connected to the Sheikah people who he says used to inhabit these lands and protect it using their power and wisdom. But hold up, Power and wisdom, huh? Why does that sound so familiar? Oh right, because of the Triforce, which is made up of 3 parts, being the Triforce of Power, the Triforce of Wisdom, and the Triforce of Courage. And it's that last word, being courage, that's missing from the power and wisdom the old man just mentioned. So we can't help but wonder that missing word might be symbolic of how Link fits into all of this, as he's historically been the human embodiment of the Triforce of Courage. So could the fact that he might be the missing piece of the Sheikah people perhaps also support the idea that he might be a Sheikah himself? At any rate, wisdom and power will only get you so far when protecting the world, and we think that just might be where the Guardians come into play. You know, those giant squid-like mechanical creatures that we first saw way back in the original E3 2014 trailer? Now, originally, we were going to put these guys in the enemy section, but here's the thing. Even though they attack Link, they're not really enemies, from a certain point of view. Because, unlike all of the other enemies we've seen so far, these guys are mechanical, with springs and bolts flying out of them when destroyed. And they also seem to be powered by the same blue energy we've seen elsewhere. And then there's the fact that they even share the same distinctive design patterns as other Sheikah-related objects, like the shrines, towers, and even Link's Sheikah slate. Which is to say that the Guardians aren't just man-made, but probably Sheikah-made, as with seemingly everything else technology-related so far. And this is further backed up by the fact that the mini-Guardians, which adorably only have 3 legs instead of 6, are the only enemies we've seen appear inside shrines. Which makes sense, seeing as everything inside them appears to be artificial and deliberately placed. Oh, and speaking of shrines, their entrances even share a similar shape with that of the Guardians' heads, complete with similar rings on the side. And we can see a similar motif reflected inside the shrines too, including on top of the lift that Link rides down, as well as above the monks. Yep, the Sheikah sure were consistent with their designs. And actually, those designs appear to be based on something in the real world, as suggested to us by one of our fans on Twitter, @Waymaguti. Does this look familiar? It's an example of ancient Japanese pottery, and if we turn it upside down, we can see it not only shares the same basic shape as the Guardian, but also the circular details as well. Neat! Anyways, given the fact that they're called Guardians, they're pretty clearly designed to guard something. But what? Well, we're not entirely sure, but the E3 demo may offer a clue. Because, as you probably know, there were quite a few Guardians to be found around the plateau. Except all of them are in various states of apparent disrepair, almost like they were frozen in time. And we think they may tell a story, because almost all the Guardians in the plateau appear to have congregated in the same general location, right outside the Temple of Time and the nearby ruins. It might mean that they were trying to defend the temple and the nearby structures from attack. It would also explain why the Temple of Time isn't just in a state of decay, but has pretty clearly sustained some massive damage. So it would seem that some kind of battle took place here. Now beyond the Temple of Time, there is one more Guardian that can be found in the plateau along the mountain river, but it too is near a heavily damaged building, suggesting it may have also been trying to defend it. It almost makes me feel bad for the poor guys. And in this year's E3 trailer, we can see another area full of Guardian corpses, almost like a Guardian graveyard. But why are they here? It's probably a safe bet that something important happened here too, we're just not sure what. Now, even though most of the Guardians have clearly seen better days, there are a few exceptions, such as this one in the plateau that awakens when Link gets close. And you can even see some rubble fall off of it as it comes back to life, suggesting it's been quite some time since it's been active, maybe for the first time since the attack. But once awakened, it's a force to be reckoned with, as it will attempt to lock on the Link with a laser sight from its eyeball. And if it maintains that lock for more than a few seconds without Link finding cover, it'll open fire, and those blasts do a massive amount of damage. In fact, it's strong enough to even blow apart the nearby wall here, which helpfully gives Link easy access to the shrine just beyond it. See, Guardians aren't always so bad. Now, not only are their blasts strong, but they have an insane range too. In this video from IGN, we can see the Guardian is still able to target Link even after he runs up the hill a fair distance away. Now, if you think the Guardians are intimidating when stationary, what about when they aren't stuck in place? Well, Nintendo Treehouse Live revealed a short video of one that's alive and well, chasing Link around while he fights back from horseback. And it's here that we can see just how frightening the Guardians can really be. Because for one, they're capable of moving and aiming their head independently. 2, they're fast, as the one here has little trouble keeping up with Link even while on horseback, which is something we saw before back in the E3 2014 trailer, with the Guardian hot on Link's and his horse's tail. Yeah, it seems like the Guardians won't give up easily. And it doesn't help that the music that plays during a Guardian encounter barely even qualifies as music. Instead, it sounds more chaotic in nature, which is perhaps a hint as to the unpredictability of Guardian battles. And we can only imagine how frightening it must be to try and take on one without the aid of your horse. Or maybe we don't have to imagine it at all. Because we can see Link doing exactly that in the E3 trailer, as he hides behind a pair of disabled Guardians while a third appears to be looking for him. And based on the intensity of this scene, what with all that smoke and fire, we're guessing this is a pretty major battle. I mean, the Guardian on the right doesn't even have its head. And those Guardians do appear to be fresh kills. The one on the left is still sparking after all, and we can even see a glowing blue component at its base, as well as another on top of the fallen Guardian to the right, which stands in stark contrast to the unpowered Guardians we've seen elsewhere. So does this mean that Link may have to battle 3 or more Guardians at this point? It's possible, but seeing as this appears to be an in-game cutscene as opposed to a dramatized gameplay moment, it might mean that something else took them out, and Link just happened upon the scene, especially because that third Guardian may not actually be looking for Link. Instead, it appears to be looking past him, just before it gets ready to fire its laser beam, which suggests that it has something else in its sights. So this could mean that there's another threat they're defending against. We just wonder what it could be. Regardless, the scene also makes us wonder if stealth might play a role in some of the Guardian encounters, especially given the fact that in the E3 demo, they're the only enemy that appears on the radar, as a glowing dot that pulsates when they're tracking you, but only when they're active. Or, at the very least, it should be a huge help in trying to escape them. Although even that may be tricky given not only how fast they are, but how dexterous their tentacles make them, such as how the one here is able to clamber over his fallen brothers, which might suggest that small structures, like walls, may barely even register as a hurdle to them. Also, in a neat touch, did you notice how the Guardians it's stepping on shift under its weight? That's pretty cool. Now, even though the Guardians are strong, they're not invincible, although it might seem like it given that they have a ridiculous 500 HP going by the one in the plateau. So how do you fight back? Well, very carefully. Okay, well, as you may have guessed or even seen, its giant glowing blue eye is key, and it seems a bullseye from your bow will inflict a fair amount of damage. But we also know that it's weak to explosives too, and each time you land a hit, its head will recoil and rotate slightly, thus breaking its lock on Link, buying him a precious few seconds to ready another shot or find cover. Furthermore, going by the field encounter, it looks like repeated hits with bomb arrows can knock them off balance too, which appears to be what gives Link the chance to truly fight back and land a direct shot when it's stationary, which also just so happens to be the finishing blow. But was the Guardian just low on energy, or is the fact that Link switched to an arrow made of energy what finished him off? We're thinking it's the latter, especially because it's the same arrow we saw Link using against the Guardian back in the original reveal trailer. So we have a feeling these energized arrows are especially powerful against the Guardians. Maybe all that extra energy overloads their circuits or something. At any rate, when Link finally does defeat a Guardian, they explode in the most spectacular manner, flinging all kinds of mechanical components everywhere. But while most of them instantly disappear, we can see a few remain on the ground. Could these be materials that Link can collect? It would seem so, given that we can see one of those pieces starts to glimmer just before the video ends, just like other collectibles. And then there's the fact that the mini Guardians similarly drop ancient screws and ancient springs that Link can pick up. But what can Link do with these components? I mean, they're not food, so can Link maybe use them in contraptions of his own? Or maybe he can just sell them for money? Okay, so we've clearly seen a lot of dead Guardians, but what took them out? Well, the obvious answer would be Ganon when he attacked 100 years ago, sending the world into a state of ruin. But the fact that most of the Guardians seem to be mostly intact suggests that something may have deactivated them remotely. But what about the ones that survived and are still active? Why were they spared when some of their brethren were not? Well, maybe they weren't spared at all. Instead, what if they've merely been reactivated, or resurrected if you will? Perhaps by Ganon. Again, it might explain their purple color, which as we touched on earlier, matches that of Ganon. Especially because purple doesn't appear to be the Guardian's natural color, at least based on the mini Guardians which are red instead. And we're guessing the mini ones are protected by the shrines to avoid being taken over. And finally, there's the fact that the Guardian in the field here doesn't appear to care at all about the nearby bokoblins and appears to be focusing solely on Link. One might think that something called a Guardian would be a little bit less discriminating if their purpose is to truly defend something. So if we're onto something here, with the Guardians being either possessed or corrupted, we wonder if there might be a way for Link to restore them to their normal selves.
Alright, and that covers everything that we could find in that section of the analysis. Of course, there's more where that came from, so be sure to check out the full analysis to see everything we could find about Breath of the Wild.